Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Hansen. I'm a technical support engineer here with the network security group at Sophos. And today we're going to be walking through how to increase the storage capacity of a Sophos UTM on AWS. So the information in this video is based off of the Sophos knowledge base article number 132495. And this article, as well as others, can be found on the Sophos community page at community.sophos.com. Now, before we get started, the only thing I need to mention is a reboot of the UTM instance will be required towards the latter portion of this walkthrough, and that would be to finalize the increase in size for the EBS volume. So just plan accordingly, plan your downtime accordingly if needed. So with that being said, let's go ahead and switch to our AWS console and get started. Okay, so here we are on the EC2 console. I'm already under instances and I already have my UTM selected. So let's go ahead and select our UTM and scroll down on the info page to root device. So if we left click on root device and then left click on the EBS ID, it'll bring us directly over to the volumes page and also filter the volumes page. So the only volume we can see is the volume we actually want to edit. Less cluttered and less of a chance of accidentally modifying the wrong volume if we do it this way. Okay, so our UTM volume is 100 gig, which is the default, of course. So if we want to right click on that and then select modify volume. Oops. All right, perfect. So it's going to give us a couple of different options, one being the volume type and two being the size. The volume type you want to leave at general purpose SSD for really two reasons. Number one, were you to change it to provision IOPS, you would see an increased EBS cost, which I assume you don't want. And number two, there are very few circumstances or cases whereby general purpose SSD is not sufficient, does not give the UTM sufficient read-write capacity to do what it needs to do. In fact, I've never encountered a case whereby we needed to increase that or change it. So I'm going to assume you're going to leave it at default, and I will do the same with mine. For the size, I am going to select really an arbitrary number. We'll say we'll increase capacity 50%. Now, keep in mind, when you are modifying volume size, you can only go upwards. So in other words, if you go ahead today and increase the size, we'll say to 200 gig, and then you find you're only using up a fraction of the hard drive space, and you want to maybe cut that down to back down to 100 or 120 gig, you can't do it. You can only increase or you can only change the size upwards. So just bear in mind when you're selecting the size, you can't revert the change, at least not easily. So 150, that's going to be what I'm going to select mine to. And we will go ahead and modify it. Click through here. Perfect. So if we go ahead and refresh the page, we'll be able to see that the volume is being modified. This will probably take a while. I think last time I did it in preparation for this walkthrough. It took about 25 minutes. So I assume you don't want to stare at this page for the next 25 minutes. So I'll go ahead and pause the recording and we'll resume in a bit once it's completed. Okay, so looks like we're all done. The expansion of the volume is completed. We're at 100%, I should say, in the green, and we can see the size is at 150 gig. So effectively, everything we need to do on the AWS portal is completed right now, and we can go ahead and SSH into the UTM. Now, I'm not going to specifically cover on how to SSH into the UTM, or I guess more importantly, how to SSH into UTM on AWS. But there are resources out there to help you do so if you don't know how, both at the Sophos community and on Amazon's documentation portal. For me, I'm going to use a PuTTY client. So I've taken my key pairing and the .pem certificate that gets downloaded when you create the key pair, and I've already converted it to PPK format and connected. So once you're connected to your UTM instance and looking at the shell prompt, we're going to go ahead and enter in LSBLK. And we just press enter there. And as we can see, we have the size of the physical disk at 150 gig. And the next line down will be the size of the file system or root partition, still at 100 gig. We will be using fdisk, fdisk today to expand the root partition. So there are other tools, of course, on Linux, which you can use to essentially accomplish the same thing we're doing here today. I'm just using fdisk because it's what I'm slightly familiar with already. So let's go ahead and type fdisk, and then what we want to do is list the mount point on the file system, and that is going to be /dev/xvda. Once we have that typed in, we can hit enter, and that'll bring us into fdisk. Okay, so the next thing we are going to do is you can type D or I'm sorry, press D or type delete. Either or will do the same thing. And you type enter and it's going to delete the partition. Uh-oh. So, which is okay. So the next thing we're going to do is type N or press N or type new. And it's going to queue us up for whether we want to create a new extended or new primary partition. We're going to type P for primary, hit enter. Partition number, default's at 1, so you can enter it in or just press enter to continue. And leave this as is. Don't type anything, just press enter. It'll use the default of 2048 for the first sector. And again, we do want to go all the way to the end. So we'll just use the default, which is the last sector on the disk. So press enter again, and our partition is now created. So we can type P or type print and confirm that everything looks good. We are starting, ending, physical disk 161. Everything looks good there. Make sure you do this step right here and don't forget it. We're going to press A, hit enter, type our partition number, hit enter, and this makes the partition bootable. So if you forget this step, and I have before when preparing for this video, you'll find that you'll go through reboot the UTM instance as you need to do, and then you'll notice that the disk, I mean, everything will show hunky dory on AWS, but you won't be able to actually access the UTM because it's not booting off of the partition. So in anyways, make sure you've hit N, or I'm sorry, hit A. And again, we've got toggle bootable flag, which is exactly what we want to do and what we just did. Next we are going to type WQ. That's going to save and exit. And then you'll see a warning pop up. This is very normal. It's just saying that it can't complete because the device is in use. So it'll say, okay, fine, I'll complete it at the next reboot. So at this point, we are ready to Reboot the UTM. We're all done with fdisk. Yes. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and, assuming you are okay to reboot your UTM instance, and you don't need to wait for a maintenance period, we can type in shutdown -R for the reboot and 0, or you can do it through the AWS console or through the UTM's web admin. We're already in SSH, so this is the simplest and quickest way for us to do it here. Okay, perfect. So the UTM is going to reboot now. And once it's rebooted, maybe what we'll do
just
actually is we
SSH
will
back
just
into
pause the
it
video here. I'll just wait for
quickly
the UTM to
and take a
reboot,
look at
and then I'll SSH
the
back
disk
in
of the
and
file
maybe
system
just
just to
confirm
verify that
that we've done everything
the reboot
correctly in here.
has worked and the file system or the root partition is expanded like it should be. So I'll just pause the video here for a minute or two until the instance comes back up and is accessible, and then we'll have a look. Okay, so our instance is back up and accessible. I've already SSH into it. And so let's go ahead and LSBLK. And excellent. So that's what we want to see. We want to see the root partition is 150 gig, just like the physical disk. And that's it. No further action is done on our side. So based on that, we'll call it a day. And thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, add them below. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.